So this is the window of tolerance, and in trauma therapy this is talked about really very frequently. Everybody knows what it is. So when you feel at your best, you are within this window of tolerance. There is natural curiosity, you are calm, focused, and also feel empathy. And this is the place where you get into the flow. However, when there is too much stress, it will cause dysregulation. And for autistics, the window of tolerance might be a bit narrower. That means there is this hypersensitivity that can throw you out of the window of tolerance into dysregulation. And then you will be in a fight or flight, or if that doesn't help, you will go into the other stress response, which is called freeze, the collapse. And in this state, you may also feel depressed and have no energy and no interest in anything. And if either this state or this state goes on for too long, it will cause disease. So the goal is that you can actually organize everything in your life in a way that suits your needs, especially for an autistic. So you remain within the window of tolerance and no chronic stress will lead to physical issues.
You're contained within the energy of something that's loving. There are a lot of different ways that people contain themselves, and I think it's kind of a fascinating thing to think about and to ask a client about.
As I had defined earlier, a setting is simply any physical environment where the person is. But the way that I like to microanalyze a person's experience in their setting is by attempting to identify how they're experiencing their sensory world, through their sound, through sight, through smell, through taste, through touch. What I understand about most people with an autism spectrum disorder is that they experience hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity. Hypersensitivity meaning overstimulated, and hyposensitivity meaning understimulated, and that can be in relation to any one of the senses. So let's take, for example, sound. So if I'm talking about a person who has hypersensitivity to sound, it's fair to understand that they're going to hear something to a lot greater extent than a person without that same hypersensitivity. So an example of that is a lady that I worked with who lived in a high-rise apartment at Surfers Paradise, and she was able to hear word for word every conversation, every TV station, and every radio program that was heard in the 3 units below her, the units beside her, and the 3 above her. You can understand from that how her experience of the world would create such a heightened level of anxiety, because she's unable to discriminate what sounds are important for her and what's not. She's unable to block out the sounds that are out of her control. There's sounds or degrees of volume that most of us would be unable to hear, but because of the hypersensitivity to sound, it's increasing that person's experience of hearing things a lot louder than other people. It's often this hypersensitivity to sound that will often get people misdiagnosed with schizophrenia as well, because they're often reported to hear voices, but for most of us who can't hear those same level of voices, then they'll often receive that misdiagnosis. Highlighting that we are in fact the same as our clients. We are the same in that we are all different, but what this workshop is going to be about is suggesting that a lot of what we're supporting our clients to go through and supporting them to be able to deal with their issues and the things that are going on for them is also a process that we can go through. So I have a premise that unless we have dealt with the issue that the client is presenting with, we're actually unable to support the client with that same issue. So if let's say for example, we've got maladaptive behaviours with eating, and a client comes to us to support us to help them understand why they have maladaptive behaviours with eating, we're actually not truly going to be able to support them unless we've actually dealt with our own patterns ourselves. So everything that I'm talking about is never about saying separating clinician from client, but is actually saying we are exactly the same as our client. And if you are working with a client and they're a person that feels judged, or if you're a person that feels judged, do you feel motivated to want to work with that person? Typically the answer would be no, we don't want to work with somebody who we're feeling judged by. So a lot of what we're looking at here is going, well, how do we work with ourselves while working with clients and seeing them as an equal as us? So therefore, as a result, they're not feeling judged, they feel equal to us in the way that they present the world. A lot of society focuses just on changing behaviour. Whereas if you see a lot of our logo says it's actually about understanding and then changing behaviour. So it's really important to not focus on changing behaviour without actually understanding why the behaviour is happening. So everything that we're doing with our clients is understanding that all behaviour is happening for a reason. And for me, it's never ever about judging behaviour. And as my clients always sit down, I'm saying to them, look, I don't care what behaviours you're going to tell me you're using, because I know those behaviours are not you. Those behaviours are just the coping mechanisms that you have to cope with life, and life in a way that you don't completely feel equipped to manage. So one of the things that we're doing is connecting with people for who they are first and not judging them or identifying by their behaviour. One of the biggest challenges for a person with autism or any disability, or in fact any person in the world, is the word that comes to me is judgment. And how do you live in this world that is full of judgment, but when you actually fear judgment? Yeah, so a lot of people with autism want to fit into the world, yeah, but their behaviours are not ones that are accepted by people, typically without autism, in a generalisation statement. So a lot of people are struggling to fit into the world because they're trying to conform to be what they think society needs them to be, rather than learning how to live them and be in the world, just being them, embracing whatever lessons are there for them to learn, and embracing the understanding that everyone is in this same world together, with lessons to learn, with challenges to experiences, with mistakes to make. But we come into this world with a lot of judgment, yeah, and when people fear differences, the fear of difference comes from the judgment and not knowing how to actually respond to not fitting a certain picture. And that's basically where the judgment comes, is that people, for their own reasons, form a picture of the way they think life should be, or the way they think another person should be. But when a person does not meet that picture, we judge them to be right or judge them to be wrong. And this right and wrong is getting in the way. Yeah, it's just one of the most harming aspects that we have in society, when we judge people, when we judge behaviours, when we judge anything to be right and wrong, rather than just going, you know what, that's just the way that person's experiencing life now, and they're in that experience because they have their lessons that they're there to learn, and how do we support them, or how do we support ourselves if it's us that is not performing according to what other people are expecting? How do we support ourselves to live in the world being us but not conforming to the pictures of what we think people should be conforming to?
So for me, I always try to find solutions, and especially bright sunlight will hurt, but also wild patterns and movements, and if there are too many people walking around, so even on the street, it's just so much less overwhelming when the street is empty and there are no people around. So when I go shopping, I will choose evening time. I will walk on a path that is less crowded, just to avoid too many people walking in my direction. Makes a huge difference. And I also don't like to be seen, so I prefer a really private space. I need privacy. This is really important to me. When I feel watched all the time, this will cause a lot of stress. And I feel very uncomfortable. I can only do a good job if I can work all by myself in a private space. So today I finished the fence, and it blocks out a little bit of the visual stuff. It's not completely see-through. Yeah, but still it doesn't block out any sound. So today on a Sunday they have some sports event, and it is very loud. You hear that? I seriously need to move into the mountains somewhere in a cabin where there is no fucking noise. And then there is the morning sunlight, which is very harsh. It really hurts the eyes when it shines through this big balcony window. So I also had to find a solution, and that's why I put this Buddha in front of the balcony entrance. Immediately it calmed down my nervous system, just because that visual input from outside was gone, and I also felt there was more privacy that way. So this makes a huge difference for me. And I have the feeling of privacy and space, solitude and silence. Those are the things that I really, really, really need.